Welcome to Vienna. We are trying to have an exchange of views, thoughts, concepts and concerns today on the issue of capacity markets. I think we have named it a little bit broader, market design of the future. But the bottom line really is, do we need capacity markets? What's the status of discussion? How do we need to adjust the market design in the electricity markets because of the growing share of renewables, and maybe not just because of the growing share, but also because of the way we are subsidizing and supporting renewables across the European Union. And we wanted to give some thought to the question, if we go ahead, what really does this entail for electricity markets, design, competition, and so on. So a very broad topic, but I think a very topical one, because this is being discussed in a number of countries very specifically and concretely to implement capacity markets. I thought that maybe with not a huge aspiration of topping the scientific participants' knowledge, I would share with you some rather simple but maybe also fundamental thoughts about what we are, or the challenges that we have in front of us when we talk about capacity markets from a regulator's point of view, who is directly and indirectly concerned with those issues, as directly, of course, as getting market designs right, and indirectly if neighboring countries implement capacity markets, capacity support mechanisms, this will have clearly an impact on the Austrian market. I think I have covered most of these motivations. One thing is clear: we have an energy market since about 10 years, at least conceptually, maybe since 5 years or 6 years, at least in parts of Europe, also in reality, which is supposed to deliver a number of conflicting goals and which has to adapt to very different boundary conditions, like we want to change the energy mix, or we want to have a zero carbon electricity generation in a couple of years, so we want to eliminate all fossil fuels from Europe as soon as possible. So we are faced with a number of direct political interferences in the market, in an energy system which tends to be rather complex, rather having a number of different facets, different aspects, and so is supposed to deliver many things at the same time, which of course in the full breadth is not possible. So you cannot have a system which will easily absorb new technologies and integrate renewables without any limits and have a competitive integrated market, because you have different subsidy schemes across the EU. You cannot have a totally integrated market that works well at the same time. This is just not possible. If you subsidize different generation technologies in different parts of the EU with different schemes, you influence the market, you distort it to a certain degree, and at some point, which we don't really know where it is, maybe some of you have an idea, the distortion grows to a level where it will basically have the market stop functioning. Of course, at the same time, we never want to lose security of supply and network stability, which again is counterintuitive, because if you subsidize on different levels, you get generation built up where the subsidies are highest, and not necessarily where the network is there. You have different speeds in building networks than generation. A windmill is up in 6 months. A power line takes up to 10, 20 years to build. So you have these mismatches across the EU. So we have a complex system, and we are meddling around with it to a certain degree in different ways across the EU, and still have this goal: this should be an integrated energy market. And I think we are now at a crossroad because the meddling has reached a level where there is, at least in my personal view, a serious danger that the whole market will, at some future time, not too distant, stop working properly, even in those areas that we still leave to the market. When we talk about capacity markets, of course, the question is, who believes that there is somebody out there who could, with a certain degree of certainty and confidence, really determine what's the right level of capacity. We have seen over the last 2 or 3 years in the financial markets, I mean, governments surely don't get it right. I mean, if you put all the sworn statements of heads of state about, what will never ever happen to Greece, to Italy, to Spain, to Portugal, and what really happened, I mean, they should all go home basically and cry, because they were so wrong, so obviously wrong within 1 or 2 years, so they were totally misrepresenting. Of course, maybe they were just lying and they knew this, but at the end of the day, as a humble consumer who pays the bill, I would rather hope that they don't lie to us intentionally, but they say what they believe is right. This is one of the reasons why we vote for them. And then if they swear that Greece will never go bankrupt, well, it just has 2 weeks ago. So who would be in a position to get the amount of capacity that we need in the various markets right? Who is best qualified to do that? And of course, on which model you would base this? Can you calculate it? Can you assess that? And just a tiny example, when we look at the last year when Germany closed about 8,000 megawatt of nuclear power plants, had we had already a capacity market or somebody deciding on that, surely somebody would have said, well, we really need to make sure that some additional capacity, maybe not 8,000, but whatever, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, is made available. Because there must be a shortage. Now we have 8,000 more, and then we have 8,000 less. That's a sizable chunk of the German generation capacity. Somebody should be making sure that there is something else built. Now, in reality, what did happen is the French found out they could be a little bit more speedy in maintaining their nuclear plants and increase their availability. So 4,000 megawatts suddenly came up out of nowhere. Then some other people decided, okay, if prices go up slightly, it might make sense to reactivate some mothballed power plants. So suddenly there was some more capacity. And the real shortage was only regional in southern Germany because the lines have not been built. So it's a good example where in a situation which is not too distant, I'm pretty sure that anybody of authority, be it the German government, the regulator, the whatever association, if they had been asked to determine how much capacity should be built now as 8,000 megawatts are being closed, I'm sure something would have been financed in the range of at least between 1,000 and 3,000 megawatt. And somebody would have paid for that. As we see now, basically completely wasted, because it's not necessary. The French just went up from 85 to 92% of nuclear availability, and here was 4,000 megawatt with no cost. So the question, I think, and will be interesting to see the discussion, do we believe somebody can get it right on a European level, and who in all the world could be that institution? So this is the sort of the problem that we see in other markets. I mean, carbon markets, we have established a global European carbon emission rights market, and we have found that it behaves sometimes very erratically. Predictions that have been made by eminent professionals from the European Commission down to many other people have been totally wrong about, are we short or long on carbon emission rights? And we are now basically at extremely low price. So the goal of the carbon emission market of sort of making low carbon generation more attractive has not worked out. Maybe it will again, but for the time being, it's not working. I think I mentioned that already. We had a situation where, of course, Germany became an importer, but if we have a European market, then we cannot limit our scope to one country. We have to have a bigger scope, and when you have a bigger scope, you have very many different motivations, different views of the future development of prices, of generation, of demand-supply balances. So I think that the question really is, do we believe we can get it right, and what type of mechanisms would we need to make sure this is right? The other thing is what is being discussed now are a number of national solutions. We have the problem that on the one side we share the vision of a common EU energy market, electricity market, a European market, which is not truly there, but at least in regions of Europe we have quite a tight integration of markets, and we hopefully will have more and more of that. But then we have nationally different support schemes for different generation technologies. We still have this national autonomy that decides on the generation types and generation mixes, which means different feed-in tariffs, fixed subsidies for investments, sometimes higher, sometimes lower, market premiums, and some sort of mixture of that. I mean, we do have in a number of countries, to my knowledge, various forms of capacity mechanisms. I mean, renewables is an obvious one, and including, of course, hydro, because if you have a feed-in tariff, what else is it except a capacity mechanism? But we also have others. I mean, we have in Spain a subsidy for a new gas-fired generation, which basically covers the cost of investment over 20 years. So basically, the investment is cost-free for the investor. You only pay for the short-run marginal cost of operating the gas plant. And I think the French and Portuguese can talk a little bit about what that has resulted in relation to locating plants. Of course, not everybody builds a plant there and not in neighboring countries. And then we have different options being explored in relation to market design, from the energy-only markets to some sort of strategic reserves being determined by whoever, different balancing markets. I mean, balancing markets, they are also capacity markets. I mean, they don't cover the total capacity, but they cover, or they assure the availability of a certain, sometimes smaller, sometimes larger part of the capacity. So we have different market designs that are at least there. Now, it's clear that we want to assure security of supply, even if we have very massive interventions into the market, mostly but not only from the renewable support. But it's not only, it's also CHP support schemes and so on. So we are in some areas already influencing the market and the relative competitiveness of generation technologies quite actively. And what has changed maybe is that now the share of renewables has exceeded, at least in parts of the European Union, the level of being below the radar screen. So 2 or 3% up or down doesn't make any difference. Now we're getting to 15, 20% of intermittent generation. So suddenly it is an issue, and suddenly there is a massive direct influence on price formation on the remaining free market. And there, of course, concerns are growing in Germany, in the UK, and we are getting into a situation where people look at models what to do. I mean, we have some models from isolated markets, islands basically, where they have tried this mechanism or tried to assure that there's always enough generation capacity available. But the question is, are those models and approaches suitable for the integrated European market? Now, depending on the calculation, you can say, well, either we have a problem or we have no problem at all. This is to 2025, based on ENTSO-E's forecast. And you already see the difficulty if you allow somebody to make the calculations, because they will be based on a number of assumptions, and God knows which assumptions will be the right ones, especially when we're talking about 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years ahead, and not just 2 or 3 years. And even that is very difficult. I mean, I still recall in 2007 where everybody was swearing we'll run out of oil and electricity and everything. Well, how were they wrong? And all of them wrong. You know, that because 2 years later we had ample electricity, oil, gas, and everything at quite low prices, because the economic situation changed very quickly. So I don't think we can assume that there will be a continuous development, either of supply-demand balances or generation buildup. I think they tend to be kind of uneven, and they will react to disruptive events. And the question is, how good can our forecasts be? So here you could either make the conclusions, everything is well, we don't need to worry, or we could fall in panic and try to get, whatever, 50 gigawatt or 100 gigawatt new generation incentivized by capacity schemes. And difficult to determine, how you get, if you look ahead to, let's say, 2020 is not that far. So if we want to have even 5 gigawatt more in 2020, we need to start today, given the lead times that we have. Now the winter outlook, also by NSOE, shows that most countries are relatively well off, and there are a few countries that have potential problems in sort of unusual severe weather conditions. If you have a scenario where the weather conditions get worse and worse, you have some problems because a number of countries turn from being self-sufficient to net importers, and we have seen in the cold spell in February of this year that this can happen fairly quickly, depending on country and on the situation, that suddenly countries that are seen as, France is a net exporter, suddenly with electric heating and sufficiently cold weather, it becomes a net importer, but there are not that many around to provide electricity on that scale they are needed. So there is obviously some reason of concern, but what was also interesting in this situation, it became apparent that we have maybe too many limits on price, on sort of market-based price formation. We have price caps for various products in the electricity market, and therefore we maybe create additional problems. I mean, we had the German situation where it seems when the electricity prices on the exchange was very high, people started selling their electricity there and relying on balancing energy, which was lower priced because of some averaging. So you could basically sell the electricity you had purchased for your customers at 200 or 300 euros at the exchange, and you could be sure that the balancing energy would not cost more than maybe 100, 150. So that's a sure business. Of course, if everybody does that, you probably kill the stability of the system because balancing is not available for 50% of the whole capacity in any given hour. It's there to sort of compensate for small fluctuations at the end. So our sort of limits or our market design, price formulas, limits on pricing, they have an effect also on system stability. When we talk about capacity mechanism, we see many, many different versions, and it warrants a very detailed analysis what exactly those mechanisms are supposed to do, what they deliver, how much they cost. So you cannot say, many countries have it and it works, because what they have and how it works is very, very different. So we see quite different ones. What is clear is you need an extremely carefully designed system, and you also need a system that is regularly updated to reflect changes in the environment, in the situation, maybe in a now bigger market or smaller market. But there is a certain amount of experience out there that I think we can draw upon. What is also obvious that you need a lot of information for whoever is supposed to make the decision, be it market participants themselves, or be it the TSO who says, I need X, or the regulator or the government. So you need a very, very good and very reliable information. The question, of course, is this information available or not? And sort of who carries the risk of misinformation? Would you be required, if whoever calculates that, to use the official energy policy suggestions? Would you have to believe what the politicians told you last month, that in 5 years we will close another X plants, and would you have to base your assumption on that? Or could you say, well, those are politicians, next year there's an election, the next government won't do this? And I recall again Germany, where they changed the policy course back and forth within a few months. So which version do you believe? Do you believe the first one or the next one? And we'll have similar situations in many countries. We'll see sort of the question, do we get obligations for suppliers to participate? Do you just offer incentives? Do you negotiate sort of the strike price, or do you have some administrative procedure to set this? Who coordinates all this, and sort of who takes the risk for wrong information? I mean, probably at the end always the consumer who has to pay the bill. But I think it is an issue if a capacity option as such could be a solution. There is some thought, or some people believe, that we have created a large share of the problems ourselves by putting price limits into energy markets. Currently we have on a number of exchanges some price limits where base load cannot go above whatever 1500, or we have also limited the negative prices. And of course that creates a certain amount of missing money. It's politically sometimes difficult to convince everybody that it's correct and good that prices should go up to 5,000 euro per megawatt hour or 10,000, because this is perceived way out of cost. But this is one of the sources of additional money that in the normal functioning market would provide some of the missing money that we have now. So aren't we trying to fix a problem in the market design, basically limiting market signals by sort of introducing another distortion? And I recall in 2003, I think, where there's this big drought in Norway, or in Scandinavia basically, where suddenly there was a serious shortage of electricity. It was also very cold around the end of the year and beginning of January. And then you could see different market designs in Norway, where they have normally 14-day price adjustments in supply contracts. You saw that prices went up for electricity and people started to use less electricity. In Sweden, where normally suppliers offer a 1-year price guarantee, you could see that electricity demand did not really contract a lot, and you had some bankruptcies from suppliers. So in unusual situations, price signals are very valuable, and Norway was saved because the big aluminum plant, they sold the electricity, closed down for a few weeks, and offered the electricity to the market. And that was a lot, because it's a very big aluminum smelter. So the price signals, basically without any government interference, allowed to balance supply and demand with quite high prices. Had they had this kind of fixed price and guaranteed for everybody, probably the situation would have required much more administrative intervention into the system to keep it stable. So I think we have to look at these mechanisms that we have today. Here are some, PGM, of course, is something to always look at. The Americans, they like calculations, so they do very complicated systems with million variables, and I think by now they also have sort of seen that this does create a certain number of problems. The price spikes, I think, although politically unpopular, are maybe one solution for capacity markets, rather for the administrative solution, and maybe a more efficient solution. We also shouldn't forget that we already have a number of capacity elements in existing energy-only markets. We're talking about balancing energy, sort of some stability reserves that the TSOs keep or have to keep, are very similar to what we talk about this later on. Of course, one could think about just extending those mechanisms rather than inventing something new. Electricity markets are fairly complicated already with a lot of variables. So maybe this would be an easy way out of that. So when we look ahead, one thing is clear: whatever we make in a form of market design will have an impact on consumer bills. At the end of the day, the total aggregated group of consumers has to pay for all the generation over a medium period of time. And the question is which approach will produce which groups of winners and losers on the subsidy side, on capacity markets, mechanisms, which of the systems will make it more or less likely that we will need technically unnecessary network expansions. I think one of the dangers is that capacity markets would, especially different ones across the EU, would distort the normal price signals for siting generation. So you get the same problem that we have for renewables, which we only can site the windmill where the wind is blowing, and then we find it difficult to build lines there, that we would sort of move that problem to all the generation mix, because siting would happen where the largest capacity payments are taking place, and then you have an oversupply there, and you discourage people in other areas to build anything at all. They wait until there is enough political impetus to also have a capacity market implemented here. So I think it is important to look whenever something is designed at winners and losers, and I think that will be an interesting discussion. And I think also, is or are capacity markets something that could and should be done on a national level? Is it even possible to do it on a national level? Is this goal compatible with the internal energy market? Or isn't it totally contrary to an internal market to have different capacity mechanisms? And wouldn't we immediately run into state aid problems if we say, okay, in my country I do have a very high capacity market, so I build a lot of power plants, and then I complain that I can't get the electricity to neighboring countries to compete there with generators who did not get the generous benefits. So this, I think, will be an interesting discussion. So I think we are probably looking forward to a very intensive debate on a European level. We have now started to embark on this central planning for infrastructure investment, meaning network investment, which is not universally shared as a great idea, but the European Union is sort of pushing ahead with that. I think we have an issue of permitting durations, and maybe a solution that is cheaper than anything else would be to shorten the lead times for new power plants, because 2 or 3 years ahead it's pretty clear what's needed, what's not needed. But today we need more like 6 to 7 years in the best case, and 10 to 12 years, or for coal even maybe 15 years before something starts operating. And that much ahead, it is very difficult to assess how much capacity might be needed, and therefore there's a big risk. That's also why very few people build nuclear plants on a purely commercial basis, because it's just so long-term that it's extremely difficult to predict what the situation might be 15 years from now. So maybe if we shorten the lead time for new power plants, all these capacity concerns just go away. And there are some ideas how this could be done. I mean, every member state could have 3 permits ready to start working, to start building, and have them prepared by somebody and then auction them off if there's a need for capacity, rather than let the poor investor go through this tedious 5 to 7 year permitting process that costs almost nothing. Of course, it only works, or it mostly works for gas, because coal has a long build time as well. And then, of course, we might look at the distortions we have already generated by having feed-in tariffs, which are way out of the market prices, and remove any operational risk from the renewable generators. And maybe we should start at that end and try to limit the distortions that these feed-in tariff systems create. And then again, maybe capacity markets don't seem that necessary anymore.